The judge in the Bill Cosby trial has declared a mistrial. We're standing by waiting for the district attorney to deliver a press conference. But we're returning to Friday's news. This is Philando Castile's mom.
I am so disappointed in the state of Minnesota. My son loved this state. He had one tattoo on his body, and it was of the Twin Cities, the state of Minnesota with TC on it. My son loved this city, and this city killed my son, and the murderer gets away.
On Friday, a Minnesota jury acquitted police officer Geronimo Yanez of all charges after he shot and killed Philando Castile during a traffic stop. The decision came nearly a year after the world watched his disturbing final moments, the last moments of his life, which was shared through a video streamed live to Facebook by Castile's girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, who narrated the aftermath of his death in real time. Yanez testified that he stopped Castile after he saw his car drive by and they made eye contact, which Yanez said gave him strong suspicions that Castile was a suspect in a recent robbery. During the stop, Castile told Yanez that he was in possession of a firearm, which he was legally licensed to carry. Officer Yanez testified that he believed he saw Castile reaching for his gun and that he feared for his life. Diamond Reynolds, who was in the driver's seat next to Castile, said that he had only been reaching for his identification. Reynolds' 4-year-old daughter was also in the car. After 5 days of deliberations, the jury cleared Yanez on all charges, on charges of second-degree manslaughter and reckless discharge of a firearm. Castile's mom's outrage after the verdict was amplified yesterday in Minnesota, where thousands of demonstrators took to the streets in protest. Police made 18 arrests following those protests, which shut down the I-94 freeway in St. Paul. And as much as the verdict came as a shock and a disappointment to many, if history is any guide, it was not much of a surprise at all. Because the only thing more rare than an officer being charged with a deadly shooting is an officer being convicted. And joining me now is Castile family attorney Judge Glenda Hatchett. And Judge Hatchett, it is rare. I mean, the prosecution, I guess, in a sense, has to be commended that they charged Officer Yanez at all. Were you surprised by the verdict?
I was surprised and very disappointed that he was acquitted. And Joy, you're absolutely right. This is the first time in the history of Minnesota that a police officer has ever been charged for shooting a civilian, for killing a civilian. And so talk about it being rare in this country, even more rare in Minnesota. And so John Choi, the prosecutor in that county, and his team were to be commended. And in fact, I said yesterday, what we saw was a combination of both talent and tenacity. But I will tell you, Joy, if we cannot get this one right, I don't know what that means for us as a nation, because for so many of us watching this trial carefully, I've been in Minnesota for the last 15 days, that it has to be justified. Even his partner, his police partner on the other window closest to the passenger side, was standing there very casually with his thumbs in his vest. And he testified that he did not see a gun, and that the gun, the EMT said that they had to reach deep into his pocket to retrieve this gun after he was shot. He fired 7 shots. 5 actually hit him. 2 in his heart. Either of them would have been fatal. And so this is a very difficult case to understand how he was acquitted.
Yeah, and now the New York Daily News is reporting on Friday that Philando Castile's uncle has called on Donald Trump and the Trump administration to bring federal charges against Geronimo Yanez. You don't expect that to happen, do you?
I do not expect that to happen, Joy, because all along I have understood and watched both from the state part as well as the federal level. And the federal prosecution will require that race was a motive in the situation, and that is a very, very steep hill. I do not expect it, and I particularly do not expect it under this administration's leadership.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just very quickly ask you, you know, we saw that the mom, Philando Castile's mom was angry, and I think rightfully so. How is the family faring this morning?
They are, you know, this has been 11 months. Valerie Castile is one of the most remarkable women I have ever encountered, but this is painful. This is deeply, deeply painful because they feel, frankly, that the system has not supported them in this matter. And I will tell you, as a mother of 2 young adult African-American men, to see him with my pathologist, Dr. Mitchell, and I went into the examination room, and to see this young man's body ripped apart with bullets when he was complying. He did everything right, and yet he is dead, is very difficult. It is very difficult, Joy.
Well, please.
But it's not over.
Yeah.
So I'm disappointed, but I am not discouraged. And let me be very clear about that.
Thank you for adding that. I really appreciate it. Judge Glenda Hatchett, thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Joy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And joining me now, Philip Atiba Goff, President of the Center for Policing Equity, and Criminal Defense Attorney Jack Rice. Philip, I'm going to come to you first because, and I think that is a point that we need to make, that it is surprising, really, when a police officer is actually brought to trial at all. You just go through the statistics. Mapping police violence, but Samson Nyongwe has been keeping track of this. 1,155 people killed by police in 2016, 13 cases where the officer was charged, 0 people convicted, because all police officers have to say is, thought he had a gun, was in fear for my life, case closed.
The reasonableness standard here, many people are saying that's the enemy. Right? The reasonableness standard, because if you think it's reasonable to be afraid of black people, well, then you can just kill them. Right? That's a self-defense standard, and it's even more so for the reasonable officer. I think, though, if we focus too much on the facts of any individual case, then we end up doing a disservice to Philando Castile and the people who loved him. We do a disservice to other folks. Right? I remember a year ago in July when the shooting took place. It was the same week as Alton Sterling. It was the same week of the Dallas shootings. Right? I was in DOJ with the then Attorney General, Loretta Lynch. We were all grieving that entire week. But I also remember 2 years ago today, at the Mother Emanuel Church and that shooting. And I also remember a longer history here. So if we talk about what's responsible for the acquittal in this particular case, we're going to talk about the reasonableness standard. And we're also going to be talking about the ways in which there are not appropriate laws to deal with discrimination that isn't intentional, that isn't about the individual character. And we'll be right to do that. But if we're not also talking about the way in which America is lying about race and has been for quite some time, if we're not talking about the mendacious history of leadership or a lack thereof, if we're not talking about a crisis of vision when it comes to actual justice in America, we're doing everybody a disservice, because as much as this case hinged on those particular factors of reasonableness and the officer and whatever was going on in the minds of the jury, the next case will hinge on the last one. One of the things that I'm hearing from the communities where the Center for Policing Equity works a great deal is it's not even anger, it's not even shock, it's resignation and, well, I guess it's on us. There is no way for me to overstate the corrosiveness of this to the American dream and the participation in that dream in communities that feel as if the state has said it's okay to kill you if I'm scared of you.
Yeah. I mean, and Jack, and I think that's the point. I mean, you have here a case where there's a little kid in the car, there's a 4-year-old in the car, there's a woman driving. The officer must have heard her narrating. This is taking place live on Facebook Live, so that the whole world can watch it unfold. So nothing really deters officers, even the presence of a child. So, I mean, I think, isn't it reasonable at this point for African Americans to conclude that, that the Black Lives Matter slogan is sort of a necessary plea because it appears that police officers don't have to mind the Black lives in front of them?
You're right. Black lives don't matter. I've tried cases in this county, in this courthouse myself, and what I can tell you is, and this is something that everybody knows, racism exists. Racism exists in the world, it exists in this country, but it also exists in our criminal justice system. I've stood in front of juries and I've had to tell them again and again and talk to them about what it is to be afraid of young black men. And what that means, when automatically you will see them and you will say, I'm afraid immediately. And understand, that lowers the standard immediately, because then all of a sudden, if I'm afraid, that means I can defend myself. And so that's what we see regularly when automatically you are afraid. And this is something I've been fighting and something I've been saying on a daily basis. Again, I've watched this happen in courtrooms across this state and across this country.
And Philip, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I really appreciate that perspective, and I want to echo something that I feel like is an important part of the conversation here. So there are CPE works with two different constituencies. You know this. We work inside police departments and we work in the communities that are most affected by it. So I talked to you a little bit about how folks are feeling like, what else can we do? We got to take justice in our own hands, which is a dangerous thing, right? But what I also want to make sure is part of the conversation on this day after is the phone calls I've been getting from chiefs and law enforcement, the people who train other officers. And to a person after this case, not after all of them, but after this case, I'm hearing exasperation, folks being tired of having to defend these tapes. I'm getting folks, chiefs and sergeants coming and talking about, you know what, this one is really hard to defend because he was clearly and literally calmly following instructions. How do I then go out and police and with a straight face say, you know what, we're here representing the best of the values of this community, right? So the cost here.
If I could jump in there?
Yeah, please.
If I could jump in there, that's the one point I've been talking with a lot of people I know in the criminal justice system on the federal and state levels as well, is that what we have seen, and this has been the problem, is that what the police have done is defend their own consistently, always, and this includes the bad ones. The problem that we've seen is that they have defended bad cops who do bad things. There are good cops in the country, there are, but when they defend everybody, including the bad ones, and then now claim that all of a sudden, now we're seeing a bunch of bad cops as if we weren't seeing them before, but you just simply can't deny it because we're watching it on tape. Well, that's the problem we're seeing in the community. What we need to see from the police, what we need to see from law enforcement is their willingness to stand up and point out their own who are the bad apples, because they need to create and develop and establish credibility, not just for the African American community. They need to establish it for the entire country. This is not a black problem, and it is a black problem, but it's also an American problem. And I think we collectively have to stand up collectively and address it. If we don't, this is going to continue. Again, the African American community is resigned. They're saying, well, yeah, of course this is happening. Of course we're dealing with this. We've always dealt with this. At some point, we have to sit down and say enough collectively. Yeah. We must.
No, I mean, I think that, you know, as you said, after a while it's exhausting. You know, you see Sandra Bland, no charges there, so that she's, you know, left to die in her cell. You see Ramarley Graham establishing that the police can bust into your house and kill your child in front of his grandma and his little baby brother. We see Eric Garner also choked to death on tape. Like, we see it on tape. You just see it over and over and over again. The Alton Sterling case, of course, again, you see it on tape unfolding in front of you. No charges, no charges, no charges, no convictions. You know, after a while, you start to wonder, what's the point? And I think that's how a lot of people feel right now, unfortunately.
Right. This is what I mean when I talk about a crisis of leadership.
Yep.
Somebody in charge has to stand up and say, look, it's not an accident that we had codes that did this for slaves, and we see something that looks very similar in certain communities right now. So if we're going to do better, we're going to need to be a whole heck of a lot more honest about what the history is here.
Well, I can tell you what the federal government is doing. Our Attorney General is about to restart the war on drugs, put more people in prison. So that should help.
I sense irony.
Yeah. Philip, Atiba, Goff, Jack Rice. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate you. All right, we are standing by still for a press conference from the district attorney in the Bill Cosby case. But coming up next, we will have a moral moment, which I think we desperately need, with the Reverend Dr. William Barber. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.